Hello, hello, hello. Welcome back to the Retail Tales. If you're a regular listener, you already know what this is about. And if this is your first time tuning in, welcome to a show where we exclusively discuss all things AI across the retail value chain. I'm Saurabh, and I'm your host. Now, since this is the first episode of 2026, I guess I should start by saying Happy New Year. Although, if I'm being honest, by the third week of January, the newness has already worn off. The resolutions have been tested, priorities have started to collide, and reality probably has firmly set in again. But what the heck? I'm still going to say Happy New Year. I hope 2026 started off on a terrific note for you. As for me, I started my new year with a couple of big industry events. I attended CES in Vegas for the first time ever, and I followed it up by continuing the tradition of being at NRF's big show in New York. And now that both these events for 2026 are in the bag, I thought it would be a great moment to pause and do a dedicated podcast episode on these two events and share with you all what I saw, what I heard, and what I experienced while being immersed in several conversations across these events. Now, these are without question two of the most influential industry events of the year, but for very different reasons. CES is an event where the future seems to arrive early, loud, unfiltered. Whereas NRF's big show is where that future is stress tested against the realities of retail operations, economics, and human behavior. And that is exactly why I do not want to approach this episode as a recap. I don't want to do a highlight reel. I don't want it to come across as a list of shiny demos or clever booths that I went to. Instead, I want to treat CES and NRF as signals about where technology is headed, signals about how retail organizations are actually absorbing and then operationalizing that technology, and obviously what all of this means for leaders who are responsible for real businesses, for real margins, real workforce, and of course, real customers. Because ultimately, these events are not about technology at all. They're about leadership decisions that will shape retail organizations for years to come, if not decades. All right. So here's how we're going to structure this episode. First, we will spend time on CES. This part of the conversation is going to be about zooming out. CES gives us a rare opportunity to observe where technology ecosystem is investing its energy, how vendors are repositioning their platforms, and which capabilities are starting to move from experimental to assumed. The goal is going to be to extract the directional patterns that will inevitably make their way into retail over the next few years. This part of the conversation is going to be about understanding the trajectory and pressure that retail organizations will soon feel, whether they're ready for it or not. And then we will move to NRF's big show, which is where those directional patterns collide with the realities of retail execution. NRF, to me at least, always surfaces the constraints, the trade-offs, the the organizational implications that CES does not. This is where we hear directly from retailers who are attempting to deploy these capabilities inside existing operating models, inside their legacy systems, and dealing with complex workforces. So the focus here is going to be on what it actually takes to move from intent to impact, and where friction tends to show up along the way. And finally, I'll try and synthesize what CES and NRF together are really telling us. Not through hype or bold predictions, but through my own interpretation. I'll try and connect the long-term signals with the near-term realities and translate them into leadership implications. And let's see if with all this, we can possibly end with a single clear thesis that retail leaders can carry forward as a guiding principle while making decisions in an increasingly AI-shaped retail landscape. All right, so let's get started. Let's begin with CES. So, as I said earlier, this was actually my first time attending CES in person. I'd heard about CES for years. I had followed the announcements. I had watched keynotes online, read the post-event summaries, and even heard people describing it as overwhelming, futuristic, and chaotic, all at once. But experiencing it firsthand was very different from hearing about it otherwise. The sheer scale of it, the density of ideas, and the speed at which conversations were happening made it immediately clear why CES carries the reputation that it does. Walking the floor for the first time, what struck me most was not any single product or demo, but the collective direction of the ecosystem. You could feel where attention was flowing, where investment dollars were concentrating, and which ideas were being treated as table stakes rather than experiments. The first-time perspective actually helped me step back and look at CES with fresh eyes. I was less jaded and much more observant. And that context matters for how I interpret what CES is signaling this year. If I had to distill CES in one overarching signal, it would be this. We are moving from AI as a capability to AI as infrastructure. Now, what does it mean? Not infrastructure in traditional IT sense, but infrastructure in the sense that intelligence is becoming embedded. It's becoming ambient and increasingly autonomous. AI wasn't positioned as a feature. It was positioned as a connective tissue across devices, across platforms, environments, and even experiences. I saw several keynotes, demos, and showcases, and the consistent thread was not novelty. It was intent. The emphasis was on autonomy, coordination, and agency working together as a system rather than as isolated capabilities. What I'm trying to say is intelligence was being presented as something that flows across the ecosystem and not just something that sits inside in a single application or a single tool. And that matters enormously for retail. For more than a decade, retail organizations have invested heavily in stitching together systems. POS, e-commerce, supply chain, marketing, loyalty, labor, and even analytics have largely evolved as separate domains which were connected through integrations and workarounds, mostly patchwork. That approach worked, and it could still work in a world where systems were primarily designed to inform humans. What CES is signaling is that the next phase is not going to be stitching. It is going to be orchestration. And orchestration is fundamentally different from anything retail organizations have built or even seen so far. It assumes systems are not just connected, but they're deliberately coordinated around outcomes. It assumes intelligence can span functions. It can reconcile competing priorities. It can understand trade-offs, and then can act with situational context rather than fixed rules. So, in many ways, orchestration represents a shift from systems that inform decisions to systems that actively shape them. You know what orchestration requires, though? It requires systems that don't just respond to inputs, but decide on outcomes. And that distinction is subtle, but extremely profound. Responding systems wait to be prompted, if you will. You give a prompt and you get an outcome. Deciding systems, on the other hand, operate with intent. Deciding systems evaluate options continuously and then take action without requiring a human to be the intermediary for every step. One of the most prominent themes at CES was agentic systems. Think of these systems as systems that can take high-level goals, decompose them into executable tasks, operate across multiple tools and platforms, and adapt their behavior based on feedback, outcomes, and results. They're designed to manage complexity instead of just analyzing it. That's the difference. It was very clear that agentic systems are not theoretical anymore. What I saw at CES was that agentic frameworks were being applied across domains that are highly relevant to retail. From logistics to fulfillment to customer engagement and even operations optimization. The message was quite unmistakable. We are entering in an era where software does not just support workflows in the background. It increasingly owns them end to end, operating with a degree of autonomy that was previously reserved for humans. And for retail leaders, this represents a fundamental shift in how work gets done. Think about how much of retail execution today relies on human coordination, on human judgment. Whether it is merchants interpreting dashboards and making assortment calls, or it's planners adjusting forecasts based on partial signals. It could be store managers who are constantly juggling between labor, inventory, compliance, and customer experience in real time. Or it could be customer service agents navigating fragmented systems to resolve for issues that look simple. They should be simple, but they rarely are. I guess in some ways, CES told us this year that the next generation of systems will absorb a significant portion of coordination burden that currently sits on human shoulders. These systems are being designed to close the gap between insight and execution. These systems are being designed to reduce the constant back and forth where humans interpret dashboards, translate signals, and manually trigger and execute actions across disconnected tools. Instead of humans acting as the glue between these systems, the systems themselves begin to take on that connective role. Now, if you're thinking in the direction of people replacement, let me be very clear. I don't think this is about replacing people. That line of thinking completely misses the point in my mind. What is really changing is the nature of human responsibility inside retail organizations. Human effort starts to move away from low-value coordination work and towards higher-value activities like oversight or judgment or exception handling or strategic decision-making. Leaders and teams spend less time pushing information from one place to another and more time evaluating outcomes, more time on making trade-offs, and definitely more time on setting direction. Now, whether that direction is wrong or right, that still depends. But at least humans are expected to set directions more than just pushing information. And in that sense, CES was signaling a redistribution of work rather than a reduction of. The cognitive load, if you will, shifts from execution mechanics to decision quality. And that shift, obviously, if it is handled thoughtfully and correctly, has the potential to elevate how retail organizations operate today. Another macro theme from CES was convergence. The traditional boundaries that once separated physical and digital experiences or hardware and software stacks, data generation and action execution, these traditional boundaries are steadily dissolving. These domains are no longer evolving independently. They're collapsing into tightly coupled systems where insight and action happen almost simultaneously. Now, that convergence was quite evident across most exhibitors on the floor in smart environments that continuously sense and adapt, in connected devices that no longer function as isolated endpoints, but as participants in a broader intelligence network. And even in edge AI capabilities that push decision-making closer to where events actually occur rather than routing everything back to a centralized system, back to, say, a cloud. So intelligence is moving closer to the moment, the location, and the context where it is needed most. For retail, this has very direct and very tangible implications for, physical locations, stores, warehouses, fulfillment centers. I mean, store in particular is no longer just a physical endpoint in the value chain. It is evolving into a sensing, into a decision-making and execution environment all at once. There are cameras, there are sensors, you have computer vision capabilities, you have edge AI. All these are transforming physical retail spaces into data-rich, responsive systems that can observe conditions, interpret signals, and initiate actions in real time without waiting for human intervention at every step. CES basically reinforced that the future of physical retail is not about digitizing the store. It is about operationalizing intelligence inside the store in a way that pretty much changes how decisions are made and actions are executed on the ground today. Now, digitization alone only makes information visible. Operationalized intelligence makes information actionable, makes it timely and increasingly autonomous. That means systems that can continuously detect issues as they emerge, systems that can assess their relative importance, prioritize actions across competing demands, and trigger responses without waiting for human intervention at every step. It is about moving from awareness to execution, and obviously doing so at the speed and scale that modern retail environments demand. Out of stocks identified and addressed automatically before they impact customers. Another example is labor. Labor redeployed dynamically based on real-time traffic patterns, based on demand signals and service needs rather than static schedules. Loss prevention shifting from reactive investigation to predictive intervention. Customer engagement adapting in real time based on context, based on intent, and based on environment. Taken together, these capabilities redefine the store from a place that reacts to problems into a place that actively anticipates and manages them. One of the other things that CES highlighted was the importance of scale-ready architectures. But it's not in an abstract or theoretical way. It was quite implicit in almost every serious demo and every credible platform conversation across a show floor. The technologies being showcased assumed massive data flows. They assumed continuous learning cycles. They assumed real-time decision loops operating at enterprise scale. And that has direct implications for cloud strategy, for edge deployment, for data platforms, for integration patterns, and obviously for governance models. They gotta evolve. These systems are designed to learn, adapt, and act in near real time, which places very different demands of architecture than traditional reporting or batch-oriented analytics ever did. And I honestly think that it's something really significant for retail leaders to take note of. The future systems envisioned at CES were simply not compatible with fragmented, brittle, or overly customized tech stacks that have grown organically over time in retail. Architectures built for stability and control alone will definitely struggle in a world that now also demands speed, flexibility, and intelligence at scale. These systems, they require coherence across data, across platforms and decision layers. They require platforms that can support reuse, interoperability, and rapid evolution without constant rework. And ultimately, they required leadership that is willing to rethink foundational architectural decisions, even when doing so is uncomfortable, is disruptive, or it challenges long-held assumptions about how technology should be structured inside the enterprise. So, do you think retail is ready? Do you think retail leaders and executives are ready? Well, only time will tell. But there seem to be clear indications from some of the leading retailers on what's to come. Now, let me be clear. While it was all very interesting and extremely thought-provoking, CES, at least to me, is not where retail execution is proven. It is where direction signals are given for what's to come. And if one needs to see where that execution is proven, one needs to head to NRF's big show, which is exactly what I did. It was exhausting attending these two massive industry events back to back, but boy, it was worth it. So let me tell you about NRF now. This was my 6th big show. And I'm not even counting the 2 chapters showing in 2021 because of COVID. One which was virtual, and then I think they did one more, somewhere in the mid 2021 timeframe, which was more in person. So an RF conference has always been interesting to me, always been insightful for me. It's kind of different, You can feel it in the air. I don't know how to explain it, but to me, NRF is where retail leaders show up with real constraints. It could be budget issues, it could be legacy system challenges, workforce challenges, regulatory pressures, margin pressures, could be customer expectations and whatnot. These are real challenges. So from that lens, I've always liked going to the big show. And this year was quite similar. It really delivered. One of the things it made unmistakably clear is that agentic AI is no longer a future concept. It is actively being deployed. Across NRF sessions, across NRF booths and retail conversations, agentic systems were everywhere. Agentic commerce, agentic customer service, agentic marketing, agentic operations. You could literally question the credibility of an exhibitor if they did not talk about agentic AI. But what was most interesting for me was not the terminology itself. It was the tone. Retailers were no longer asking whether this is real. That question has largely been settled. Instead, the conversation clearly shifted to how to deploy these capabilities, 1, responsibly, 2, securely, And three, at scale, inside complex retail organizations with complex retail functions. The curiosity was no longer academic. It was it was more it was more operational. Leaders were focused on questions of rollout, questions of adoption, governance, and even long-term sustainability rather than proof of concept or proof of technology. Retailers like Walmart, Nordstrom, Warby Parker, Macy's, Ulta, and several others were talking about how they are already applying agentic systems, agentic AI, to real and day-to-day problems across their businesses. What they spoke about was not experimentation for its own sake, but purposeful deployment. Use cases that are not hypothetical or aspirational, use cases grounded in concrete operational pain points and tightly aligned to real business priorities. I can't name them, but one of the retail leaders on stage, for example, shared how they deployed a customer service agent to handle peak season demand and how they were able to achieve autonomous handling of a significant portion of customer chats while still maintaining service quality and brand consistency during the holidays. That's real. Their focus was not just on deflection, but it was on preserving customer experience at scale. Another example, one of the other retail leaders discussed how agentic tools are enabling merchants to make operational changes faster, without waiting on technical teams or lengthy release cycles. And you know what that does, right? That shift basically changes decision velocity and empowers business teams closer to the customer and to the product. These are not pilots built for innovation theater. These were operational systems delivering measurable value and influencing how work actually gets done inside retail organizations. Now, at the same time, NRF also surfaced a strong and a very deliberate note of caution. Several retail leaders emphasized the importance of security, governance, and trust as these agentic systems gain broader access and greater autonomy. With that autonomy comes increased risk. And leaders were candid about the need to manage it proactively rather than reactively. This, I thought, was an extremely critical point as well. As AI systems gain agency, the surface area for failure increases and increases tremendously. Questions around data access, around decision rights, around auditability and accountability move from background to the center of the conversation. Who owns the decision when an agent acts? How do you constrain behavior without killing value? How do you maintain trust with customers and employees? Who is accountable if an agent makes a mistake? So in essence, NRF made it very clear that the retailers who will win are those who can move quickly, but not recklessly. Those who can balance speed with discipline and autonomy with governance and innovation with trust are going to be the winners in this race. Another powerful theme at NRF was the reframing of AI's role relative to people. Despite all the excitement around automation and around autonomy, the dominant narrative at NRF Big Show was about enablement. And that distinction, between enablement and replacement showed up consistently across sessions, panels, and retail conversations. I had several conversations with, so many retail leaders out there who spoke very deliberately about using AI to strengthen the people side of the business rather than, completely sidestepping. They described deploying AI to improve scheduling accuracy, to optimize staffing levels, and significantly reduce the cognitive load placed on frontline managers. The goal was to remove friction from day-to-day work so teams could focus on what actually matters. There was a strong emphasis on freeing up time, time for better onboarding, time for coaching and development, time for meaningful customer engagement on the floor. And in several cases, AI was positioned as a way to give managers and associates back the capacity to lead rather than constantly react to operational noise. Actually, I attended one of the sessions that highlighted quite a telling data point. The speaker on stage spoke about a very small percentage of CEOs today who view their AI programs as successful. And the retailers who are seeing progress are not necessarily the ones with most advanced technology. They seem to be the ones who are framing AI as augmentation rather than substitution. And they are investing just as much in change management, in training and adoption, as they are in the technology itself, which, honestly speaking, was an important leadership lesson, especially, for leaders who are trying to make progress with AI within the organization. Now, my consistent reminder to all retail leaders, all of my clients who I speak with, is that technology adoption in retail fails not because systems don't work, not because technology doesn't work, but because organizations do not change. There's a resistance to change. Without shifts in roles, without shifts in incentives, without decision rights evolving and culture evolving, even the most sophisticated AI capabilities will struggle to deliver sustained value. So I was super glad that this was one of the more dominant conversation topics this year. And now, finally, the crown jewel of topics, a topic that pretty much took center stage throughout the big show. And frankly, it's the topic that deserves far more attention than it is currently getting. Agentic commerce. If there was one idea at NRF that felt qualitatively different from everything else, this was it. Not because it was flashy, but because of what it represented. Agentic commerce is not an incremental improvement to e-commerce. It is not a better recommendation engine or a better checkout flow. It is essentially an altogether different way commerce happens. On a side note, I recently co-wrote a Wall Street Journal article on this topic, and if you are looking to get smart on agentic commerce, I think you should go check it out. I'll share the link in the description of this episode, but I genuinely believe that agentic commerce represents the biggest shift in retail commerce since the rise of e-commerce itself. Why? Here's why. Traditional e-commerce is built around humans doing the work. Humans search, humans browse, humans compare, humans decide. And even when AI is involved, it is largely assisting a human-driven journey. Agentic commerce flips that model. In an agentic commerce world, intelligent agents act on behalf of consumers and businesses. They understand intent, they understand constraints, they understand preferences and context. They evaluate options across merchants and channels. They negotiate, they transact, and they even manage post-purchase activities. The human is no longer orchestrating every step. The agent is. That's why agentic commerce cannot be treated as just another feature of e-commerce. Just like mobile commerce was not simply a smaller version of desktop e-commerce, agentic commerce is not simply e-commerce with AI layered on top. It has different discovery mechanics, different decision flows. It has different economics and different implications for branding, for pricing, for loyalty, and even customer relationships. The CAC is different, the AOV is different, and the LTV is different. And you know what? The definition of customer itself is different. Human is not the customer anymore. An agent acting on behalf of the human is the new customer. And that's why I argue that it's a separate channel altogether for retailers. In agentic commerce, the buyer, as we know it, may never see your website. The agent will. The agent will decide whether your product meets the criteria. The agent will decide whether you are competitive. And the agent will decide whether you even enter the consideration set. And you know what that does? That changes everything. And this is where one of the most important announcements of NRF also comes into play. Google announced the Universal Commerce Protocol, or UCP. Now, at a high level, UCP is designed to create a standardized way for merchants, platforms, and agents to communicate with each other. It enables agents to understand product data, availability, pricing, policies, and fulfillment options in a more consistent, machine readable way, and that's across retailers, right? You could think of it as the protocol layer that allows agentic systems to transact reliably and at scale. Now, instead of scraping websites or relying on bespoke integrations, agents can interact with retailers through a shared language. UCP provides that language. And that pretty much slams the door open for true agent-driven discovery, for true comparison, and for purchase across the retail ecosystem. I'm going to do a much deeper episode on UCP quite soon because in my mind, it deserves its own conversation. But here's the teaser. UCP has the potential to become the standard that defines how commerce operates in an agent-driven world. In much the same way that, let's say Android. Android created an open, extensible standard for mobile. UCP is designed to standardize how agents, platforms, and merchants communicate, transact, and settle commerce. A critical aspect of UCP is Google's commitment that retailers remain the merchant of record for agent-driven off-site transactions. Even when purchases originate through, let's say, Gemini or Google Wallet or another LLM interface, retailers retain control over fulfillment, customer relationships, compliance, all of which helps reduce the risk of disintermediation and channel conflict. It's very exciting, and like I said, I will do a detailed episode on UCP soon. But coming back to NRF, Google did set up the standard for retailers going forward. It basically showed that agentic commerce is not something to watch from the sidelines. It is something that requires active, deliberate preparation. It demands new thinking around product data strategy, pricing and promotion logic, brand representation in a machine-mediated environment, and mostly evolving role of retail media in a world where agents increasingly shape demand rather than humans. So, all in all, and much like previous years, NRF's big show was a huge success this year as well. Now, as I was reflecting on my learnings post NRF, I couldn't help myself thinking about CES and NRF together. While CES showed us where technology is going, NRF showed us how retail is absorbing it. And together, they point to a few unmistakable truths. Actually, 3 unmistakable and unmissable trends, as I could tell. First, agentic AI is not optional. Retail leaders should stop asking whether to adopt it or not. Instead, they should start asking how to go about it, how to get ready for it. What must they do now to make sure that they don't get left behind, or worse yet, become irrelevant? Because the question is no longer if systems will act on behalf of customers and on behalf of organizations. The question really is how much autonomy they should have, under what constraints, and with what accountability. All right. So second unmistakable trend is that operating models matter more than use cases. Retailers stuck in pilot purgatory are not lacking ideas. They're lacking structures for decision rights, structures for ownership, structures for value realization. And agentic systems will only further expose organizational dysfunction faster, much faster than any other previous technology. And finally, the third one, leadership alignment, is absolutely critical. This is not a CIO or a CTO problem. It is a C-suite problem. It is a board problem. CEOs must set the ambition. CFOs must enforce value discipline. CTOs and CAIOs must build scalable foundations with the help of CDOs. CHROs must lead workforce transformation. And all these C-suite leaders must think long-term. Not in quarters, not in pilots, but in capabilities, long-term capabilities. It's not a project. The retailers who win will be those who treat AI as a core capability, not a project. So if there's one thing and one thing only that I'd love for you to take away from this episode, it's this. AI is no longer a tool that retail leaders use. It is becoming an operating system that retail leaders must lead with. And the retailers who recognize this early and act with clarity and discipline will define the next era of retail. And on that note, it's a wrap on this episode. Thanks for listening. Here's me, Saurabh, signing off. If you like the content, don't forget to follow this show to keep learning a thing or two about retail AI. You can follow us on LinkedIn and subscribe to this show on Spotify or Apple. And you know what? We're now on YouTube and iHeartRadio as well. So pick your favorite platform and join me in the next episode of The Retail Tales, a show which is exclusively focused on exploring all things AI across the retail value chain. Until then, stay safe, stay healthy, and stay curious.